Hello, BookTube. Well, as all of you know by now, Frida and I are up in Vermont on vacation. But that hasn't stopped the mail from coming. I redirected a lot of the mail here from publishers and editors that I knew were going to be sending me things, in the relatively short term. So mail has been trickling in here. The open question now in my mind is how long will mail trickle in here after I'm gone? But in the meantime, we have three packages, and they're all fairly thin, so this shouldn't take long. And it also shouldn't contain much in the way of Steve squealing. Because thin packages tend not to do that. Okay, this first one is a novel from Penguin Classics, or the Penguin Press. Looks like it's going to be a paperback original at $17. It's called The Shape of Darkness by Laura Purcell. That name rings a bell with me, a really strong one. But I can't place it for the moment. Does anybody I know her? Okay, yes. All right. She wrote The Silent Companions, The Poison Thread, and now The House of Whispers, and now The Shape of Darkness. So it looks like she writes modern Gothic horror. And this came out in 2021. So I have no sell sheet in it, but I imagine that it's either out now or about soon, because this is a finished copy. This is just going to be a $17 paperback. So what have we got here? As the age of the photograph dawns in Victorian Bath, that's the town of Bath in Victorian England, silhouette artist Agnes is struggling to keep her business afloat. Oh, well, she would be, right? The history books in this old house are full of photo inserts that are silhouettes. It was the rage of the day to do the silhouettes, the fine point silhouettes of famous people. We have them for almost all the founding fathers where we don't have photographs. But they would be the ones who would be thrown out of business by the photography industry. Still recovering from a serious illness herself, making enough money to support her elderly mother and her orphaned nephew Cedric has never been easy. Okay, right, I get the point, but let's keep in mind the state of her still recovering from a serious illness is not in dire need of making money. She is. She is. You take 2 seconds to rewrite the sentence. But then one of her clients is murdered shortly after sitting for Agnes, and then another, and another. Why is the killer seemingly targeting her business? Desperately seeking an answer, she approaches Pearl, a child spirit medium lodging in Bath with her older half-sister and her ailing father, hoping that if Pearl can make contact with those who died, they might reveal who killed them. But Agnes and Pearl quickly discover that instead they may have opened the door to something they can never put back. Okay, so yeah, a sort of quasi-supernatural Gothic horror set in the early Victorian period. I don't read a whole lot of that, and I'm certainly interested in it. And anything that has that logo, I am perfectly happy to try. So we will try that. And then these next two packages are also thin, and unlike this one, they are not unknown to me. I don't know what's in them, but I know what they are. I know they are both coming from my editor at the Martha's Vineyard Gazette, a broadsheet newspaper on the island of Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts. The Gazette is old and storied. It has had wonderful people go in and out of its roster. And I am the book critic. I am the book reviewer for the Martha's Vineyard Gazette. And my editor is a wonderful guy who lives on island. And you can always tell that summer is percolating because suddenly I will start to get books from him. In the winter and fall, for some reason I don't. It follows the same cycle as the vineyard itself, which is very much a vacation haven. So the population swells by 100 times from June until late August, and then shrinks back to normal, or what islanders would call normal. So I don't know what these books are, but I do know a couple of things about them. I know for sure one thing, which is that I will definitely be reviewing them. So there's that. No matter what we see in these packages, I will be writing about them. And number two is something we've mentioned on this channel before. I also know that they will have some sort of connection with Martha's Vineyard. My editor and the paper in general has decided that Martha's Vineyard is for Martha's Vineyard. The Gazette is for the vineyard. So you will not learn anything about the outside world in the Martha's Vineyard Gazette except filtered through the lens of the Gazette itself. You wouldn't know that there was a pandemic on in 2020 if the pandemic had not slowly crept onto the island. You wouldn't know anything about a vaccine if the vaccine had not started being distributed on the island. You wouldn't know about books, even in my book reviews, except for the ones that have some sort of connection with the island. Now that connection is fairly broad. Writers have for a century loved going to the vineyard and relaxing, And one of the ways that writers relax, as my hosts here can tell you, is to keep writing. So the books are lots and lots of books of all kinds are connected to the vineyard. And I go hunting for them in addition to that. A lot of enterprising authors, I'm sure that these two books are enterprising authors, will send their vineyard-related books to my editor in hopes of a review. But I go hunting anyway. I go hunting for the authors who won't do that, for the authors who write a 600-page biography of some famous, I don't even know, some famous early 20th century civil rights lawyer or mid 20th century Supreme Court justice. And it will never occur to them to send a review copy to my editor at the Gazette. But a little research shows that that particular person spent every summer on the vineyard. That definitely counts. That is how I've managed to review quite a few books that don't seem vineyard centric. I'm betting these two are. They're thin, so I'm betting they are. Not to denigrate. The only reason that I'm bringing it up at all is because it's one small town newspaper philosophy. It's one editorial philosophy. You can have another editorial philosophy when it comes to small town book coverage. And I know this because I am now a small town book editor. I have a much, much smaller and less illustrious version of my Vineyard Gazette editor's job in northern Georgia at Big Canoe News. And I've decided to take the opposite view. I've decided that there are no such things as regional readers, and so there should not be any, I should not be running a regional book section. So I cover everything. But the other philosophy is every bit as valid, and that's the one that we follow at the Gazette. So we'll see what we have here. Oh, wow. Okay, well, at least a lot of times with these vineyard-centric things, I don't know anything about them. They're local authors. But this doesn't quite qualify as a local author. This is Strange Love by Fred Waitskin, and that might count as a local author, except as the cover shows you, he's the author of Searching for Bobby Fischer, which was a national release book and had national press. And it has a pub sheet instead of a friendly note from the author, just back from the Crabtree Patch. So what have we got here? This spring, the author returns with an alluring novel, tiny little thing. A seductive story of a man who glimpses the heart of the book he struggled to write in the captivating stories of a young woman. Narrated by a man vacationing in a remote fishing village on the spectacular Pacific coast of Costa Rica, Strange Love tells the story of disappointments, unusual desires, and things people do when their dreams haven't materialized in the way they hoped. Okay, fine. So that is half an hour to read, and then another half hour to ponder and write about. Do we have a release date? Okay, this is late May. This came out in late May. So I can already hear somewhere distantly across the water, I can hear my editor's toe tapping impatiently. I will get to this right away. I have another book. I actually brought it here to Vermont. That is a June release, a late June release for the Vineyard Gazette. But this takes priority over that, even though I got that first. So now, of course, okay, I know what this is now. It's a kind of writing/love story, a novel, really a novella. But what I really want to know now is what is the connection? I want to draw the dots between this author and the vineyard. So am I going to be told anything about... It's illustrated by a Costa Rican artist, Sofia Ruiz. Forced out of New York City by the coronavirus, the author found inspiration for the novel among the people who populate an isolated coastal outpost in Costa Rica. Okay, I'm writing for an isolated coastal outpost, but it's not in Costa Rica. So I want to know. I want to know why I'm getting this at all. What is this author's connection to the vineyard? I know that if I don't find it, my editor's going to want to include it anyway. Just a line is going to want to be included anyway. Oh, here we go. The author lives in Manhattan and Martha's Vineyard with his wife Bonnie and frequently visits Costa Rica. Okay. All right, so he summers on the vineyard. Okay, or winters there. A lot of people prefer the vineyard in winter. It has a weird beauty to it in winter. That beauty was significantly greater 30 years ago when there was almost no possibility of communication with the outside world in winter, and even more so 50 years ago when the vineyard was literally a frozen ghost town in winter and had an incredible beauty, where you would go to some of the great stretches of beach on the eastern side of the island, and there would be no one there at all, just you and your dogs, with the cold waves pouring in and cold clouds overhead. It's not like that really anymore. It stays a vacation haven even in winter now, now that we have planes, and as far as I know, private boating, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and now that we have Wi-Fi. Someday, somebody's going to write a doctoral dissertation on what Wi-Fi has done to our conception of the seasons and time. But it's not like that anymore. The vineyard really doesn't slow down a whole lot in winter anymore. But at least now I know this guy spends time there, so I can just say, part-time vineyard resident and get it over with. Now let's see what the next one is. That's interesting, though. I don't review a lot of fiction. I basically nowadays only review fiction on my own hook for Open Letters Review, or when an editor specifically asks me to. Otherwise, no. I certainly don't pitch it to anybody, because what would be the point? Authors have enough to contend with without me ribbonizing them at will. So what is this next one? Oh, okay, all right. This is an independently done thing, and I can't scorn that, because I've had independently done novels from the Martha's Vineyard Gazette that turned out to be wonderful. One in particular called Plum Belly, that I still think about. There are scenes in that book that I still think about. I would never have learned about it if I hadn't just happened to be the Vineyard Gazette's book editor when the local author sent that privately printed book or independently printed book to my editor. I would never learn about it otherwise. This could be another example of that. So this is by T. Elizabeth Bell, and it's called Counting Chickens, a Martha's Vineyard novel. 2 fictions. And I think the other one, the one that I have to do in June, is also fiction. Back on the vineyard after a failed marriage, Remy Litchfield is struggling to launch her high-end concierge service. Picked a bit of a wrong location to do that. Her business plan is complete down to the fresh eggs provided courtesy of her very own flock of designer chickens. There's right around the corner from the old house here. There's another old house. There are old houses everywhere. It's not really much of a distinction. But right around the corner, there's a house that has a little chicken coop in back with a couple of roosters and a bunch of hens. And they're in chain link, and the space underneath their hen house is nice and shady, and it is also enclosed in chain link. So they can't come to the fence. They can't come to the road. But Frida has still seen them from a distance, and she has heard the noises they make. She knows they're not any animal she's ever met, and she has occasionally screamed at them just on precaution, I guess. She has never actually met a chicken. She's never actually come close enough to meet one. And you see these indie press advanced books have this. I'm sure you've seen this on, for instance, Thomas's channel, SFF 180. They have this annoying banner, not for resale, all the way around the thing. And unfortunately, that means it blocks out the cover copy on the back. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to read that. What she didn't count on was the return of her high school crush, Jake Madden. The rest of it is just behind letters. I can't make it out. We'll go to the next paragraph. With the help of an escaped dog and her gang of eccentric and loyal friends, Remy must find a way to balance the demands of her new life, but will catering to the whims of her high-end clients leave time for anything else. And the author photo has the author at Martha's Vineyard, so that clears up that. But let's find out. The author of 2 novels. She has a husband, 3 children, a very old dog, and no chickens or goats. Passionately in love with the vineyard, she shares her photography and more about her life on Instagram. So she's on Instagram, sharing pictures of the vineyard. Interesting. Okay, well, so those are the 2 Vineyard Gazette books, 2 novels that I will definitely be reviewing. I don't have a pub sheet for this one. Does it give me a date at all? Oh no, this is also a May release. Okay, all right, these take priority. I think they will go right on the top of the pile. Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, so we have 3 novels today for this mail haul, and 2 I am going to be reviewing. So you will have an example of me writing about fiction. That doesn't often happen these days. It's not exactly me. If you want exactly me writing about fiction, then you'd have to look at Open Letters Review, which I think I leave a link to on every video. If I don't, since I mentioned it here, I'll try to do it. For the Vineyard Gazette, it's not just vineyard local, it's also nice. Okay, it's kind. So, my opening remarks notwithstanding, my editor would not know what to do if I savaged one of these things. And since they're both very small press books, I don't think that I would want to either. So it will be just a different tone. It'll be a different take. I will try to accentuate the positive in a way that a novel with bigger airs to it, I might not. I might be a lot less generous. If a novel is expecting me to genuflect, neither of these things is. But if it is, then I go after it. Like for instance, me and the rest of the critical world, we're just waiting for Jonathan Franzen. His new book comes out this year. We're just waiting. I've said many times in this video that I don't typically do commissioned reviews of fiction. I think that will be an exception. but these things are not like that at all. These authors have the best of intentions. So the only way that I would ever include a really negative paragraph in one of these reviews would be if the author does something wrong. Just wrong. If there's something inept, if a character is forgotten, if a plot thread is forgotten. No matter, I mean, the Vineyard's house style is local and also nice. But my first obligation is to you. My first obligation is to my readers. So if the book makes an actual ontological mistake, I'm going to have to mention that. But other than that, no. so there you go. Not a bad little mail haul for here in small town Vermont. 3 novels, 2 of which you will definitely see reviews of. I notice ordinarily when I talk about Big Canoe News, for instance, in northern Georgia, I'm always slipping in a note that maybe you should consider subscribing. Big Canoe News is terrifically designed. Big 60-page thing that you get at the beginning of every month. And it does have a national and international focus in its national and international sections. And its new book coverage is all over the spectrum of books. So I often slip in a note that maybe you might want to part with $30 and subscribe to Big Canoe News. You notice I don't do that with the Vineyard Gazette. It is very much a local paper. So as much as I love it dearly. I've loved it for a long time. I loved one of its old editors passionately. I don't advise people to subscribe to it unless you're going to spend time on the Vineyard. I mean, other than that, the only thing that you would read that would have any universal interest would be the columns in the back of the paper about bird sighting or, what fish have washed up or things like that. And that is why those are the most popular columns. Because all the people who flood the Vineyard, they're headed there in droves today. The people who flood the Vineyard aren't really interested in who won the trombone contest at Martha's Vineyard High School. So they go to those back 3 columns because at least that's universally applicable. A bird lover is going to want to know what somebody saw at Menemsha, no matter where they're from. But otherwise, I love the paper. But if you don't have a connection with the Vineyard, I wouldn't bother to subscribe, unlike Big Canoe News. But anyway, that's our mail haul for today. We'll see what tomorrow brings. Thank you, BookTube.